Sup nerds, welcome back to my channel. My name's Maddie. If you're new here, I hope your day is going well. And as you can probably tell, the setup looks a lot different. I don't know if I like it yet. I guess we're gonna find out. And also, hopefully, the fact that I have the mic closer to my face as well as a bunch of shit behind me will make it not as empty room sounding as a comment I got on one of my last videos. So let me know how you like it. Let's go ahead and get into today's video, which is going to be a lot different than, as I've always say, my usual content. Let's just get right in, shall we? So I've been watching a lot more movies this year, and I have some thoughts on a couple that I watched recently that seem to have kind of the same conflict at the core of their plot lines, and that is age gap romances. Age gaps have always been a taboo. I feel like there has always been a sense of discomfort with an age gap romance. And I definitely think over the course of the last few years, that discomfort has become much more prevalent and much more normalized. For example, Belichick, who is a football person, if you don't know, dating someone who is like 50 years younger than him, and the entire internet constantly being annoyed by Aaron Taylor Johnson's wife. That's a whole other video I could probably make because I also have thoughts on it. But the movies that came out over this year that I want to talk about are Miller's Girl and The Age of You. These two movies have, at the crux of it, a very similar plot and conflict, obviously, because both of these movies have at the center of it an age gap between the love interests. Whereas obviously they are in very different genres and very different viewpoints on the characters themselves. The biggest obvious difference between these two movies is the fact that The Age of You is between a middle-aged woman and a 20-ish-year-old rock star, and Miller's Girl is with a middle-aged man and a indeterminate age teenager who is his student. Clearly there is a perspective you can have on these situations, and I just want to talk about my thoughts on these movies, and I thought that you guys would like to hear about it, and we could have a discussion about just age gap as a trope at this point, not necessarily a moral standing, if you will. More of a trope within a story, removed from legality, if you get my drift. The Idea of You is a rom-com about a mom of a kid who by accident meets and falls in love with Harry Styles, or in this adaptation of This Poor Man's Life, August Moon. This, yes, was adapted from a fanfiction. Side note, I don't know who was styling this actor in this movie, but he was dressed abhorrently badly for someone who is supposed to be inspired by Harry Styles. Like, I get that, you know, Harry Styles and defeating the gender roles has been a meme for a while, but at least the man tries and doesn't just wear sweatpants. Whereas in this movie, they decided that August Moon was going to be dressed badly. I don't even think that's his name anymore. It's been a minute since I've watched these movies. If you couldn't tell, my upload schedule has been a little bit whack. So if I get people's names wrong, sorry. The one credit to this movie that I will have to give it is Anne Hathaway. She looked amazing the entire time, and she was too good for this movie and managed to make this shit like award-winning almost with her acting capabilities. It was very impressive. These two lovebirds meet in the most secondhand cringe, millennial embarrassment core meet cute when Anne Hathaway's character ends up going into August Moon's, or whatever his name is, trailer to use the bathroom because she thinks it's a public restroom, even though it's clearly a rock star's trailer, or at least it's someone's private trailer. And so they have this very awkward meet cute. Then Mr. Moon finds her art gallery, buys a bunch of her art because he has money, and also he's apparently hot for teacher, even though she's the art gallerier in this situation, and sparks end up flying. Why? I don't know. I don't actually know what these two have in common at all. That is never really established in this movie. And of course there is the elephant in the room that there is like 15 years age difference, and she is a mom. Egads. So over summer break, while her teenager is away at camp, Miss art gallery basically decides that instead of, moping around in her empty house, she's going to jet set across the world on tour with this rock star who she doesn't seemingly have anything in common with. There is a few very awkward moments where she realizes that everyone around her is much younger than her. And I just have to ask, how did you not notice that to begin with? I get that this is a self-insert fantasy for someone who wrote a fan fiction, but I cannot imagine dating someone younger than me who has a very different lifestyle than me and then hanging out with their friends for an entire summer. I'm 30, and if I stay up past 11, I have to take 4 naps the next day to recover. So I can't imagine touring Europe and not telling anyone where I am. That's crazy to me. Not saying that I couldn't do it if a rock star wants to pick me up, I'm open to the idea, but definitely not someone 15 years younger, right? I don't know, maybe. 15 years older, though. So, of course, the news breaks that Mr. Moon is dating someone who seemingly is much older than him, and she is, almost doxxed immediately. These two lovebirds decide to break it off and reconvene when her daughter is 18 to protect her privacy, and they end up doing that. Which, I get that this is a romance, and of course we have to have the romantic ending, but I just, don't feasibly see how these two would reconvene over something that I feel like is just very trite. And obviously, as you can tell, I enjoyed this movie aesthetically when it came to Anne Hathaway's performance, but the plot line was not one that I ended up wanting to write home about. I thought the plot line with the ex-husband and his current or going to be ex-wife was really random and kind of boring, and the script was a little bit lackluster in that regard, and the ending just felt like, okay, yay, they got together, even though I still don't know what they have in common. Cool. But audiences liked it, so let's go ahead and talk about the movie that audiences didn't like, but I did. Miller's Girl to me is the more romantic movie of the two, at the very least in its tragedy. I would like to say my idea of romance is skewed, and I tend to not like the happily ever after necessity of certain rom-coms, and that's why I find this gothic horror psychological thriller that is Miller's Girl far more engaging than I did The Idea of You. On top of that, if you know me or can even maybe pick up from the general situation that's happening behind me, you could probably understand that I'm a pretentious douchebag, and I fuck with the concept of watching pretentious douchebags do stupid shit. I did enjoy this movie thoroughly. Do I support this movie if whatever it was trying to do? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not really sure. But I can definitively say that I am surprised by the reaction to this movie, because not even 2 decades ago at this point, Ezra and Arya were a huge thing, and this movie is basically that with the perspective, the morality perspective completely shifted, which I find fascinating. To set the scene, this movie is set in Tennessee, and it is very much a Southern Gothic love story, almost. It follows a girl named Cairo Sweet, who lives in a mansion by herself with no one to look after her, who becomes enamored with her English professor, who I would argue is the actual main character of the movie. This is Jonathan Miller. Jonathan Miller is a jaded ex-writer who has a wife who is much more successful than him and becomes quite pleased by Cairo, his new student's obsession with him, basically. Cairo tells the English teacher that she has read all 12 books on the syllabus, which rookie numbers. Upon leaving his classroom, she ends up leaving the books behind that she had with her, one of which is a copy of Henry Miller's Under the Roofs in Paris, and additionally a copy of Miller's book, Abercrams and Ambersands or whatever. I can't remember the Apples and Ambersands. It's a book that he wrote that was so lacklusterly reviewed and read that he never wrote again after writing it, and it had never once been checked out of the school library, which I think is funny, because if your English teacher had published a book, the just roast value of checking it out and making fun of them for having a shitty book would just be so, it would just be there. I don't know, English, high schoolers are mean. The fact that no one has read his book even in the school he works at for several years. That just doesn't make sense to me. So in the cast of characters of this movie, we have Coach, English teacher's best friend. We have the English teacher's estranged but very successful wife, and Minnie, Cairo's best friend, who is apparently very good friends with her. Speaking of the way that there has this mentality nowadays that, any kind of flirtation between people with a certain age gap, there is this flirtation between Minnie and Coach that I just feel like would have raised red flags pretty much anywhere, even when I was in middle school. And clearly it's done in a way that both of them are aware that this is inappropriate, but as Cairo mentions to Minnie's a lesbian, so it's all in good fun, right? Also, side note, everyone has wildly different takes on Southern accents in this movie. Jenna is pretty good at what she's doing, whereas Martin seems to have one American accent, and he's sticking to it, and I applaud him for it. So flashing forward, Jenna writes a story that basically blows English teacher's mind, right? And he ends up favoring her because of a talent that she clearly showcases, and the fact that she seems to be very, very interested in him as a teacher. He ends up inviting her out to a poetry reading where things just get a little tense, What I have to say about this movie is that it is gloriously, beautifully shot. At least in my opinion. I thought it looked beautiful. Jenna is stunning. It just looked absolutely fantastic, and it was doing it so in a way that made you both very intrigued but also uneasy in the situation. So Cairo and the English teacher's dynamic begins to burgeon and grow as they spend more and more time together. She meets him before school, they share a cigarette, some sassy little lines, and it becomes more and more clear that Cairo is inspiring the English teacher to maybe come back out of his shell that he just crouched into after being panned for his one novel. But things end up taking a very different turn when Cairo turns in her midterm exam. She was told by the English teacher to write in the style of one of her favorite authors. She does so, and she chooses Henry Miller. Now, if you're not aware, Henry Miller is a very notorious author, and in the movie we never actually hear what is going on in his book. Coach reads some of the lines, but he doesn't really say what's happening on the page. I actually ended up picking up a copy of Under the Paris Roofs, and I couldn't get 5 pages in. I haven't read Henry Miller since I think college, and I don't think I ever picked up that book, but there is very much a reason why this book is not taught in high school. It is not appropriate. So Cairo writes this story to the English teacher in the style of Henry Miller. You can imagine what was in that story. It was very much categorically a love letter. Bear in mind, at no point does Cairo actually state her age. I think she at some point says well, what age do you think I am, or what age should I be, to a very adult man that she is currently having this erotic intellectual relationship with. The rest of the movie, Cairo ends up taking on this pseudo-villain role because she has all of these emotions that she doesn't know what to deal with, and she doesn't have any guidance from anyone on how to handle the situation, and clearly the English teacher has no ability to disengage from what monster he has abetted and creating. The ending of Miller's Girl is a cliffhanger. We don't really know what happens. It's evocative, and it doesn't have that happy little we got together in 10 years little bow, which I know is not the way love stories end. Everybody gets their happily ever after, and that's not what I enjoy. I like having a cliffhanger. I like having these people were all wrong. These people were all wrong. They were all flawed. They never should have made any of those decisions. And yes, the fact that Cairo's character becomes this antagonist is a very distinct choice. And I definitely think that there was reasons for it because of the fact that Martin Freeman's character is the protagonist in a lot of ways. It's about his story with losing his art form and then meeting this very manic pixie goth girl and almost feeling the ability to start writing again and then just blowing up his life because a teenager fell in love with him. These two movies are clearly supposed to be for very different audiences. And I find it very interesting because I think that the idea of you is very much an idea of a person. There is a middle-aged woman out there or somebody who wrote this story about someone falling in love with a much younger man, and it's more widely accepted than a obvious teacher-student romance where it becomes a psychological thriller. Like that completely makes sense. But I do find it fascinating just how quickly people immediately assume that because of the age gap between even just the co-stars of Miller's Girl, that it is inherently promoting this dynamic between them, which I just don't think that movie was doing. I think that the movie was showcasing how passionate people can be about art and how without even knowing it, because of the way that emotions work and how like hormones and things will like just drive people to insanity, we end up with a situation that is untenable. And that's why the fact that the idea of you never really has that discussion, the fact that that relationship could be very well as untenable as the one in Miller's Girl, is where I just really want to know what you guys think. Because I found the fact that like this woman who's in her 40s, she's been really successful her whole life, has this 20-year-old guy come in and swoop her up and just change her life for whatever, I guess. I found that very distinctly different than the way that I felt while watching a very beautiful movie, obviously very stylized, that had a very different take on what I think is a pretty similar situation, to be honest. A very similar trope, a very similar conflict. As you can tell, I'm very much off book. What could I say? I don't typically date younger. I went out with someone recently that was 2 years younger, but I got a free book out of it. There's a story time about that on the Patreon if you want to read that, if you want to watch that. But what are your guys' thoughts on age gaps in general? Just tell me more about it in the comments. I don't know if I'll be doing more of this type of video. Please let me know if you enjoyed it. I'm going to go now. Like, subscribe, all the good stuff. Bye!